Hello, hello, and thank you for joining us, Shark's Perspective, the podcast with subject matter experts in marketing. On this show, I frequently talk about how valuable data driven marketing is, especially for targeting and attribution. But think about this: are you putting a price tag on what your personal data is worth? Do you really understand what data you're giving away or what's happening with it? Are you giving that important data away just for a coupon of small value or for a one in a bazillion chance at a sweepstakes entry? And is your brand acting responsibly with that data, not just by the new laws, but also as a strategical and operational advantage to earn a consumer's trust? Jodi Daniels is a certified informational privacy professional, the founder of Red Clover Advisors, and a subject matter expert in online data strategy. And on this episode, we'll discuss how people should handle their own personal data, GDPR, the California Consumer Privacy Act, and how you as a brand can demonstrate your handling of data in order to build additional trust with your customers. So let's tune in to a lucky Red Clover advisor with a data steward shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Jodi, thank you so much for joining us on A Shark's Perspective today. If you would tell us a little bit about your background and career thus far.
Sure. So glad to be here. I started my career more than 20 years ago in corporate. I started as an accountant at Deloitte. Then I worked in finance and strategy at Home Depot. And then I spent nearly a decade at Cox Enterprises and their subsidiary Cox Automotive doing strategy work, online advertising. I built a behaviorally targeted ad network. So I stalked you for cars. And then that's how I got into privacy. Some people find that to be a little creepy. And from there, built a privacy program, and then went to Bank of America and was the privacy expert on digital banking and parts of digital marketing. And then just under a year and a half ago, I opened my own boutique privacy consultancy called Red Clover Advisors.
Great. So if you look at data in general, data privacy in general, we hear so often about so much data coming in the last 2 years, more than we've seen in the last two millennia. But a lot of that is customer data. And, those 1,000 to bazillion points of light that they have on every person. Talk, if you will, a little bit about the state of data that's out there on people and what people are really sort of giving up from a privacy standpoint.
Well, there is a significant amount of data. And from a marketer's point of view, we're luring people in to give us more. So many will give their email address, their name, their birthday, so they can get 20% off at their local restaurant. In total, they might have saved $1 or $5. So they're sort of putting a price tag on what their personal data is worth. But when they're doing that, I don't think many customers are really understanding what data they're giving and what's happening with it, because some of those companies will gather it all up, sell it to other companies, and then there's a variety of sort of middle players that bundle it all together and create profiles. And there's this mass market of sharing and selling and trying to understand data so that companies ultimately can keep targeting the end consumer. So I think it's great that we have data and we can target, because I'm never going to buy a pickup truck. So I should not get pickup truck ads. And you should use data to make sure that I never get a pickup truck ad.
Agreed.
At the same time, I should be pretty careful about when I give up my data so that I can just save like $1. And I think that's the interesting balance. And then data's super cheap. I mean, let's think about our pictures, right? We all take 1,000 pictures, it feels like every minute, because it's just so easy to do so. And then we upload them to all these different platforms. And so now our personal private photos are shared on all these platforms, just sort of as an example.
So then let's jump into, obviously the one that's taken over a lot of the conversation of recent, and that's GDPR. Talk a little bit about what GDPR is, what's the impact that we're going to see, and obviously how does it's a European law, but it impacts us over here.
Absolutely. So it is a European law. It is effective as of May 25th, 2018. So it's been in effect a couple months, and it has a long-reaching impact. So for any business around the world that processes data on an EU resident, that business has to comply. And for starters, It's called the General Data Protection Regulation, and it's an update to Europe's existing privacy law that was nearly 20 years old. And so, with the globalization and digitization of data, it was time for a new privacy law. And the way Europe looks at privacy is very different than the way the US looks at privacy. It's a fundamental right.
Hmm.
And it's very much a opt-in nature in many respects. I have to have a legal basis. I have to have a really valid reason. I have to document what I'm doing with that data, and I have to have the individual rather has control over their data. The US philosophy is more of what we call a sectoral approach. So think about in banking. You get a credit card or you open a new bank statement, you get that long privacy notice. That falls under the financial privacy rules. You go to the doctor's office and you have to agree to HIPAA. That's the healthcare privacy rules. If you're a marketer, you have CAN spam to deal with email, and there's a variety of others. So we take a very different approach. And in those privacy laws, it's very much a I'm going to tell you what we're doing, and then maybe after the fact, I'll tell you what choices you have. It's not exactly the finite fundamental rights that GDPR has. And then the other interesting impact is so not only do businesses have to comply if you process data, and that's global for any business around the world, and there's really no minimum threshold. You just have to process data. You could be a solo blogger and knowingly, purposefully, actively trying to lure, target, process data, serve an EU resident, and you're in scope. But other countries around the world are following suit. So it's really starting to set a precedent on reestablishing privacy regulation around the world.
So, how are companies in the U.S. typically handling GDPR? I mean, is it cosmetic? Is it more of a check the box mentality? What, or are they really doing things?
So I think it's an interesting hodgepodge. So I talk to companies all day, and many still don't realize that they're in scope. They think there's some type of minimum threshold. So there's the group that are sort of ignoring it. Then there's the group that I think has definitely done that cosmetic external face. So they put up an updated privacy notice. People listening have probably seen the cookie banner that is on many websites. So they might have put a cookie banner on the website, and then they kind of are done. So that's sort of the external view. Others have done more to meet the requirements, but they might have just done it one time. So they almost had a checklist. They did everything on the checklist, filed it away in their digital file, and don't have a plan to keep it up. And GDPR really is a concept of privacy by design, security by default. It's not just a checklist. All the work that companies need to do is truly the foundation. It's the starting point. And then you have to think about how do I maintain it on an ongoing basis.
So, is it fair to say that from an industry vertical standpoint, banking, financial services are the ones that are handling it well, and everybody else is just kind of wild, wild west?
I don't think that's 100% fair. I think there are a lot of companies that are handling it well. I think it's just a matter of each company and what what their culture is, how many people and resources they've put to it. I've seen some huge Fortune 100 brands uh, kind of take their time with it, and I've seen some really small companies be 100% on top of it.
Hmm. Well, are you seeing where companies think that they've done more than they're actually doing, and maybe it's just sort of a lack of knowledge of it?
Yes, I definitely think that there are companies who think that they've done what they need to, but don't appreciate that every time they bring on a new vendor, for example, or they get a new service provider, or they want to change the or put a new web page out there, or change their product, and they're going to collect or use data differently, that they now have to be thinking about all their GDPR obligations
Hmm.
every time they do one of those things.
It's not
So
just a simple NDA that blankets you in every company you work with, huh?
it is absolutely not. And in fact, just last week, someone asked me, hey, does an NDA count? And I said, no, an NDA does not count. An NDA merely protects both companies from sharing the information that they're discussing. It does not address anything about how they're going to use the information or use the personal data that's at hand.
So how will the law at least help? I mean, we know what kind of regulations that are going to be put on. We've heard the news about fines and lawsuits coming, but how can the law help and enhance data privacy?
So I think it can do it in a couple ways. So I think first, a company often for the first time is going to have a really great understanding of the data that they're collecting. So when you know where all your data is, what you're collecting, how you're storing it, using it, sharing it, you can then make some choices and decide, do I really need 6 copies of the social security
Right.
number in all these databases? Probably not. And so now you can start reducing your risk. You also can start identifying ways that you might be able to use data in a better manner. Maybe you'll have the capability to send a more targeted message because you realize, look at all this first party data that I have. I didn't realize that I had all of that. And so you'll send a more appropriate message to someone instead of relying on a variety of third party companies, as an example. And I've also seen from an operational point of view. So, of course, you're going to start understanding, do 10 people have access to systems that they shouldn't? So, right, that's one area. But also, and I had one company who the sales team was sending emails. And when the sales team sends them, they send them from Outlook. And there's no opt out when they're trying to send a marketing message.
Mm-hmm.
And under GDPR, any marketing message, and it's really actually combined with another marketing law called the e-privacy directive, not to get too complicated. But essentially, when you start thinking about the marketing laws in Europe, you must have an opt out. So through all the GDPR activities, we are now able to help encourage the business to work with the marketing platform and their email service provider, which means then they'll understand who's opening their emails. And if I didn't open them, I can send them another email, and I can actually be more effective in the emails that I'm sending versus just sending it from Outlook from the sales team. So the marketing team was pretty excited to get support to be able to help encourage everyone to start using their tools.
So then we've got a new law in California, a fairly new law. Can you tell us a little bit of detail on what that law is?
Yes. So it is called the California Consumer Privacy Act, and it is effective January 2020, and it was passed by the California legislature in June 2018. Some people call it a mini GDPR. It's not it's not as comprehensive as GDPR. GDPR really is much more extensive. However, the really big components in the what we call CCPA is kind of the acronym for it, are individual rights. So under GDPR, I have a variety of individual rights, like I might ask for my data to be deleted. So not just opt out of my email, but completely delete it. Or I might ask you to stop targeting me. Or maybe I want to port my data to your competitor, as an example. And there's a variety of others. Well, California adopted a list of individual rights that are very similar to GDPR, and in some ways are actually kind of more strict. So, in other words, more people will fall into the ability to opt out. So, it's really important for a company to know what data they have, where it is, how they're using it, because if I am a California resident and I ask this business, hey, I want to delete my data, I'm going to need to know what to do. So the individual rights piece is really important. There's also a private right of action for certain situations for a data breach. So if a company is found pretty much negligent in a data breach, as an individual, I could sue that company, and there's some damage remedies for me under the California law. If I'm a company and I sell data, I literally have to have a button on my website that says, do not sell my data, with essentially a form that pops up. I'd enter in information, and now that business has to figure out all the different places that my data is that might have been sold, and exclude just me. So maybe there's 100,000 people, and I'm the only one who's made the request. They have to figure out to eliminate just me from it. And then there'll be some privacy notice updates. And I think we'll have a little bit better insight into exactly what those will look like coming in the early part of 2019.
So what's the difference with GDPR and the California law? Because I mean, it's going to get to a point where you don't know. You're almost afraid to target anybody on the left or anybody on the right. 5,000 miles away versus the left coast. I mean, it's going to become difficult to navigate through all of them, and California is just the first.
So the GDPR is very heavy on documentation, and the California law does not require a business to perform certain types of documentation. So, for example, under GDPR, there's something called Article 30. So, GDPR is basically composed of 99 articles, kind of imagine them as almost like chapters. And so, Article 30 says companies have to have this report that says, this is all the data that I am collecting. This is almost like a data flow, basically. And you
Mm-hmm.
have to answer a variety of questions: how long you retain it, what your legal basis is, how you secure the data. None of that is required under California. Now, I would argue it's going to be really hard to meet California's requirements if you don't know those answers, but you don't have to have it in a fancy report like you do readily available to meet GDPR's obligations. So the documentation is very specific for GDPR. There's not really that same specificity for California. The other piece is GDPR requires these legal basis to be able to process data. And what that means is there's essentially 6 different reasons that you have to be able to meet to be able to process data. So in marketing, most people have been talking about consent, meaning I've opted in to receive an email, or I've said, yes, you can place cookies on my website. There's others called legitimate interest, contract, a legal obligation, and a couple more. In California, we don't have that same situation. There isn't the same legal basis requirement to be able to process the data. So some people call GDPR more of an opt-in and California more of an opt-out. It's a little bit more complex than just that. But if you boiled it to sort of that very simple level, that would be kind of fair to say.
Well, we've used the example of HIPAA a few times, especially when you say documentation, which, HIPAA looked like it was going to be. I mean, it's been good for data privacy, but it's also, turns everybody's nose up when they think about the amount of documentation and the triplicate and quadruplicate of forms that people had to do. So, if you look at GDPR through that same lens, for marketers, is there a competitive advantage in really sort of channeling GDPR and the California law and data privacy in general?
So I think so. The HIPAA compared to GDPR is very similar. I mean, there's certainly some nuances, but very similar. So, for example, right, business associate in HIPAA is like a processor in GDPR. Some of the same security requirements. So, if a company was HIPAA compliant, they're well on their way for GDPR compliance. But again, not done. So, from a marketing and competitive advantage, I think it's all about really understanding your customer. And to me, privacy is all about trust. And the whole point of GDPR is
So
to
true.
try and sort of rein businesses back in on all the data that they're collecting and how they're using it. And unfortunately, I feel like it's sort of like kindergarten, where all the rules are set because of the one kid in class who broke them and did something that they shouldn't have. It's sort of the same here. We've had some bad actors misuse data, and so now there's these regulations in place to try and ensure businesses are doing the right thing. So for any business that is harnessing their data and really providing value to the end user, and they're doing it within, the rules of GDPR and the rules of California, they're going to still win and they're going to still be fine. It's the companies that are trying to manipulate the data they have and sort of just make a buck off of someone's data and not just provide value to the end customer, that are the ones that I think are struggling the most. It's certainly a documentation heavy law. There's certainly, I didn't write the law. There's pieces of it I would do differently. However, I think this is what we have. And if we look at it, the companies that embrace, I'm going to build a great relationship with my customer, and I'm going to let them know that I care about them as a person, and I'm not just going to try and sell their data and make a dollar. but what I deliver to them is going to be really valuable, then those customers or those businesses rather will win.
So you said bad actors. Give us an example of a bad actor out there.
Oh, put me on the spot with that one. So, I mean, right, Facebook is a good one. It's love and hate. Many times over the course, and even in the US, if you look at their privacy history, and look, first, I'm an avid Facebook user, I use it all the time. But if you look at the course of their history, they made a lot of decisions with privacy last.
Mm-hmm.
Privacy was not first in their decisions. And it's a massive data machine, which is incredible for marketers. But at the same time, a number of businesses feel kind of trapped. Like all their data is with Facebook, and you have to work with Facebook. And a lot of consumers are mad that their data is being harnessed and sold to a number of other places, and they didn't know about it. They didn't have control about it. So, Facebook is going to have to work through how they really continue to put privacy first. They've completely revamped their privacy program. They even have TV commercials, at least here in the US, I've seen about their privacy practices and how they're really working to make sure that consumers are front and center. And they're going to have to work with businesses to ensure that everyone is complying with the law. So Facebook has to comply with the law. They have to support businesses to comply with the law, but businesses also have to take their own responsibility. So it really just makes everyone have to pay more attention and not just sort of be willy-nilly with wherever this data is, and choose carefully and appropriately. So the other interesting example would be Equifax, that suffered a significant breach last year, and their executive team was replaced. They suffered a huge financial consequences to their stock, to fines, reputational harm. So that was a big monster size breach. And interestingly, I had the opportunity to hear from their chief information security officer, known as a CISO, who is the new CISO, who replaced the one before. And from that, they are really completely redoing how they look at privacy and security in the company. So down to management incentives, which I think is just completely fascinating. So everyone in the company really is a data steward. They really are having a role in ensuring that the data is protected. Whether you're in HR, your IT, your finance, everyone is probably touching data in some capacity. And it's everyone's job. It's not just the security team's job to protect data. And I work a lot with marketers, and it's really important for everyone to understand there's the security angle. That's the protection piece. That's where Equifax got in trouble. But the use and collection is the privacy piece. So if I have the data, doesn't mean that I can use it however I want to. I have to really be thoughtful about what is the end expectation of my customer. What does the law say that I can and cannot do? And if you're in the gray zone, which I think a lot of businesses have been in the gray zone before, and they've erred on the aggressive side, with all these laws in place and customer expectations globally changing, now might be the time to take the more conservative approach.
So how about an example of a good actor?
I love Apple, and Apple actually just announced within the last week, I think, a brand new privacy portal where individuals can go and manage their own data. So really help execute on their own individual rights, or some people call them data subject access rights. And they also have a page that explains their products and how they're looking at privacy in those products. And it's not the privacy notice, right? It's not the long legal document that explains what they're doing, but they might take the iPhone and say, this is how we're managing your privacy on the iPhone, or in iTunes, this might be how we're managing your privacy, or on the iPad, and so on and so forth, or Apple TV rather. So I love that they're taking a proactive stand. Their CEO, Tim Cook, has said, privacy is one of the most important pieces of the 21st century. So they are all about an amazing customer experience, and they're translating that into the privacy of their customers. I think they're a brilliant example.
Great. So what can consumers do to take a better hold of their data today? I mean, I think everything we hear can, pretty much scare you more than Freddy Krueger, and then you forget about it and you start opting into stuff for a dollar coupon. But where do consumers start going to manage their own data?
Yeah, it's a great point. And sort of the mad and then forget is a really interesting one with Facebook. So a lot of people were mad about Facebook and Cambridge Analytica,
Yep.
but then they kept using Facebook. So if
To
someone's
vent
really
about
mad,
Facebook.
I think they need to, a take a stand. But really is to pay attention to where they're giving their data and really ask the questions and demand the answers from companies. What type of smart TV do you have? Do you know where the smart TV is collecting data? Is it
Hmm.
always listening? Do you have sort of a, an Alexa or a Google Home like device? Do you know what their policies are? Be smart when you're speaking to Siri or a Siri like concept. Don't give sensitive information when you're out in public. So I think a lot of times consumers sort of blame all the companies, but the consumer has to take responsibility too. It is
Agreed.
your data, and you're giving the data to the company. You have to decide what data to give to the company. So businesses need to be good, honest, high integrity, ethical uh, businesses. People also have to realize I have to have some common sense. I have to question who is it I'm giving this business, or giving my personal data to this business? Are they a trusted business? Is it a secured website? And the more that consumers start asking these questions, the more businesses will realize consumers really care. And kind of going back to that GDPR piece, EU customers really do care, whether it be a business demanding another business be GDPR compliant and they won't work with them if they're not, or the individual who will not give their email or to someone or be mad that they're automatically added to an email list because they know that's not right.
Hmm.
So they're pretty savvy and are going to expect businesses to be savvy. And I think for our US listeners that consumers need to start taking a little bit more of that EU approach and really expecting businesses to protect their data and use it properly.
Agreed. So, Jodi, are you ready for the 5 most important questions you're going to be asked today?
Sure.
All right, this is an easy one based off a previous answer, but I'll go ahead and ask it. iPhone or Android?
iPhone.
Pecan pie or pecan pie? I'm asking somebody in Atlanta this. So,
So I wasn't raised here, so it's going to be pecan.
red clover or green clover? Because remember,
Red clover.
green clover's lucky though. Seinfeld or Friends?
Oh, that's a hard one. I'm going to have to go with friends.
Oh, oh, this show just went downhill quick. And the most important question: biscuits or cornbread?
Biscuits.
Good answer. Jodi, thank you so much for being on the show today. Where can people follow you, follow your thoughts, your expertise, and advice?
So, redcloveradvisors.com. I have a Red Clover Advisors Facebook page. You can find me personally, Jodi Daniels, kind of Jodi Hoffman Daniels, actually, on LinkedIn. And I also have a Facebook group, if you want to learn more, called GDPR and Online Privacy 101 on Facebook.
Perfect. Jodi, thank you so much for being on A Shark's Perspective today.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity. It was my pleasure.
So there was my conversation with Jodi Daniels, a certified informational privacy professional, the founder of Red Clover Advisors, and a subject matter expert in online data strategy. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with her. First, data is cheap. You would be shocked at the amount of data that's out there that you've basically given away. In the US, we often treat data like it's a commodity. However, in Europe, privacy is a fundamental right, and that's why we have GDPR. Global companies are following suit, and it's setting a precedent on privacy regulations and how we operationalize the use of data. Like we discussed, some brands have even turned it into a marketing advantage that allows customers to trust them more. I'm a huge proponent of using data, but the bad actors give us reason to question. Second, here are a few basic ways that a corporation can look at data privacy. 1, it needs to be organized. Easier said than done. Look and see how many copies of your customer data are in multiple locations. Reduce your risk further and take a very close look at who has access to that data. Are you overextending that by providing it to too many third parties who simply have an NDA, especially those who aren't built to know how to use that data correctly? And use data in more targeted ways that consumers expect. send more appropriate messages. Third, the consumer does have to take some responsibility too. Example, you can't vent about Facebook on Facebook and then forget about your privacy settings. Pay attention to where you're giving away your data. Ask the questions and demand answers. Yes, our world is changing, and there are a lot of sites and devices we use every day that collect our personal data. However, it shouldn't be a given that your smart TV or virtual assistant or a website has an automatic license to share that data. Businesses should be honest and ethical, but inspect what you expect. Is it a trusted business? It is a secure website. Are they GDPR compliant? Did you opt in? Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you again for trusting me with your time regarding another one of the many components that makes up marketing today. And know that when this shark finds privacy on a beach or in the water, then I won't be sharing my happy place online, but I will be back, so join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.